Vice President J.D. Vance has a special message for men. Here he is relaying it at day one of the Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington yesterday.
I think that our culture sends a message to young men that you should suppress every masculine urge. You should try to cast aside your family. You should try to suppress what makes you a young man in the first place. And I think that my message to young men is don't allow this broken culture to send you a message that you're a bad person because you're a man, because you like to tell a joke, because you like to have a beer with your friends, or because you're competitive.
This discourse, much of it online, comes amid an ongoing larger conversation about what it means to be a man.
Conservative commentator Brett Cooper sat down with former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan, popular YouTuber, this week to discuss that exact question.
We kind of have this new caricature of men, and obviously I think that it is a response to the softening of men in our society, obviously, and what people are experiencing, but it feels now we've been pushed in the opposite direction, where men are now these caricatures of you can't cry, you can't love a woman, you can't get married, you know, being a father's gay.
I think being a man, I mean, if you're not trying to better society, then what the are you doing? It takes being vulnerable. It takes raising kids, and it takes, you know, monogamous relationships to better society. Every man's got to get, you know, a certain amount of mischief out of their system to become like the man that they're supposed to be. But if you haven't left a mark on society, you know, whether it's your kids or your wife or whoever, your nieces and nephews, what have you done here?
The number of young male voters who voted for Donald Trump and Vance reveal that many have shifted right. This week, journalist Derek Thompson wrote about a phenomenon about what he calls Generation C. And he wrote, "These are the young people whose experiences with COVID's health, political, and economic crises caused a strong shift among young people." He continued, "The pandemic increased alone time, sending young men and women in highly gendered social media spaces, where the youngest men in particular seem to have become significantly more anti-feminist and open to right-wing influencers and parties."
Author Richard Reeves, who wrote the book Of Boys and Men, is an outspoken advocate for improving the lives of those boys and men without hindering women.
Reeves believes boys and men are struggling in today's world and says toxic masculinity is a counterproductive term. He writes in his book, very few boys and men are likely to react well to the idea that there is something toxic inside them that needs to be exercised.
Reeves addressed the male voter in an op-ed this summer in the Wall Street Journal. He wrote, "The 2024 vote was set to be a referendum on the rights of women. Instead, it has become a debate over the needs and desires of men. The question now is which model of manhood will win in November. The macho brawler of the Trump-Vance ticket, or the kindly girl dad offered by Harris and Walz, the fighter or the coach." Now, we all know the answer to how that turned out, but look, Stephen, this is obviously a huge topic. I will have plenty to say about it. What's your initial thoughts?
Well, I think let's start at the beginning. You know, one of the first things that J.D. Vance said was that there's sort of this encouragement in the culture for men to suppress their masculine urges. And, you know, everyone in the CPAC room kind of nods along, goes, oh, yeah, suppressing masculine urges. What does that mean? You know, what are we talking about here? And I think I could guess what sort of the scions of the Me Too movement, because of what that was all about, right? And also kind of just boilerplate feminists think male urges are. It tends to be domination, harm of others, sexual violence, or just raw sexual appetite, stuff like that. And I would say that J.D. Vance, his perspective is that the masculine urges are more about leading others, sort of being that large presence in a room, building things, and also destroying them. You know, the kid playing with Legos who just really wants to knock the whole city down and then put it back together again. I think there's this attitude there that boy is going to be scolded by the overprotective mom, the helicopter parent, or the female teacher in the classroom and go, why don't we not destroy things instead of building them? Well, boys are good at both, and they need to be directed in that way. So what did you take on masculine urges?
So the point that I found about masculine urges, or well, of what J.D. Vance said about masculine urges, is, you know, his argument is the culture is hostile to them. And is the culture really hostile to them? The most watched TV event of every year is the Super Bowl. The most popular music genre in America is hip hop. The most popular podcast in America, at least until last week, is Joe Rogan. Do those elements of huge touchstones in American culture suggest that people should suppress masculine urges? Quite the reverse, I would say. So I worry at some level that there's a backlash against equality, really. But let me just. I was glad actually to see.
Hold on though. But like,
okay. Well, hold.
Let's
I'll get.
take
Okay.
a cultural slogan. The
Yeah.
future is female. All right. So this is something that kind of goes around in entertainment circles a lot. And this went viral when Kathleen Kennedy, who runs Star Wars and Lucasfilm, wore this T-shirt that says "The future is female." It spawned a bunch of articles and analysis, and people picked up this slogan in the political space too. Harvard held a symposium about the future being female, women in elected office. What does that mean? The future is female. Is that some sort of positive message? If the future is, where are the men?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here, and I think that's what J.D. Vance is responding to. Why do we have these slogans that are unnecessarily divisive and is speaking almost as if we're doing replacement?
Well, to the point about unnecessary divisiveness and how we overcome it, I was actually quite impressed in the clip that we played to see the two, I presume, conservative figures talking about the dangers of a limited view of masculinity. Yeah. Because this is something I'm going to have to sort of beg your indulgence in a sense to talk a little bit sort of in, not exactly in personal terms, but I think this is such an important issue to get into because, look, I mean, I'm a 50-year-old man. I hope I've learned some lessons along the way. And one of the lessons, I would argue, is authentic masculinity emanates from feeling comfortable in one's own skin.
Agreed.
And that can take various shapes. What I see online a lot, particularly with younger men, is a very obvious discomfort in their own skin sometimes. And I don't want to be uncompassionate to those men themselves. But what I worry about is they are being sold a sort of caricature of masculinity, sometimes literally sold it for profit, by some of the worst people in the world, honestly.
The room is Andrew Tate.
The Andrew Tates of the world, the Conor McGregors of the world, to note my Irish heritage briefly. But a kind of caricature that is sold as, I think, strong and brave and dominant, and anyone with any measure of emotional maturity really recognizes it as an expression of insecurity or anxiety, sometimes of fear. And I not to go on at too much length, but I honestly worry that young men are being sold a version of masculinity that is kind of a recipe for unhappiness, because, and I'm speaking particularly of heterosexual young men here, there is a version that is very suspicious of women, very suspicious of female independence, very suspicious of female sexuality, and is so sort of cartoonishly masculine that I think it leaves no room for real connection, real intimacy, tenderness, actually. And I think that those are real problems.
Brett Cooper is formerly of the Daily Wire, and she had on Sean Ryan, who's the third biggest podcaster in the world. He doesn't get as much coverage as Joe Rogan does, but this is a guy who served in the SEALs, experienced military man, and he's talking in that interview about masculinity as control, mastery of self, knowing who you are, and also building things, monogamous relationships, having kids, and leading others. And then he turns in that interview and also then talks about crying, right? So this is the famous, boys should cry, and that's good. And he agrees. In general, guys need to be able to open up and share who they are and what they care about. And there's this subtone there about men need to be able to fight and defend things. And to defend things, they have to know what is good. They have to know what they're fighting for. So it's sort of like this cartoon of, you know, the man who's fighting back against industrialization and destroying, you know, beautiful landscapes. You'd cry over the knocking down of a tree. A little tear trickles down your cheek because something beautiful was destroyed. Men need encouragement to actually get involved in the game of civilization building, fighting back against something that is bad. Otherwise, men's urges are turned inward. They destroy themselves and they destroy people around them. When they are not given sort of that command by society to do great things. The message of Walls and Kamala was, it's okay to sit back seat and applaud for your wife. And it is. It is. Okay. You should be a supportive husband. But that's not like inspiring to boys. They want to be told to go out and slay a dragon. That's why Jordan Peterson is so gosh darn popular.
I mean, maybe. I think that there just has to be a care about not creating such a rigid framework for masculinity that it in fact exacerbates the problems that we're talking about, makes people more alienated, more angry, more, to use your terminology, within themselves.
You're so right, and we don't want that. And I think one of the ways that you get there, and Richard Reeves talks about this in his models for education reform, we need more male teachers. There have got to be more men in the classroom because boys need mentors. They need men to guide them, to show them how to be men. And what you have in the culture, and again, I think this comes from Hollywood and from the Democratic establishment, is women are going to tell you how to be a man. And there's a realm for that, particularly in romantic relationships, but boys need to be shown the way by men. And that starts in the classroom. And that also, unfortunately, begins in the social media realm when they're looking for guys who are telling them how to make it through this life. So you don't want it to be one thing or the other, and we need to do better in our education system, even if that means holding boys back a year to emotionally mature, which Richard Reeves has also suggested. We don't have a system that recognizes the differences between boys and girls and how stark they are. We just sort of expect them all to fit in one mold, behave, sit down in class, and do whatever the predominantly female teachers say. What if we had a system that celebrated boys' natural inclinations, held them back a year so they can stop being so obnoxious as they tend to be, and then succeed better in life?
Sure. Well, so much we could say about that, but we will leave it there for the moment. Coming up, who is Peter Morocco and why should you care? That's next.